I believe that in some cases, terrorism can be justified. But before undertaking such an arduous task, one must first define terrorism. Of the many definitions made by scholars, I will borrow two. The first definition is by Chomsky, and Chomsky defines terrorism by the use of more or less random violence against whole populations. And the second is by Guerras, who defines the subject as the deliberate killing of innocent people at random in order to spread fear through a whole population and force the hand of its political leaders. It is true that the slaughtering of innocent people is horrible and depraved, but if we were hypothetically in a situation wherein we were to choose between two evils, should we not choose the lesser of the two? I will now state two cases wherein one case of terrorism is not justified and the latter is. The first case is the Hiroshima bombing. President Harry Truman wanted Japan to surrender quickly because it would be costly for them in pursuing other attempts. What is disturbing is that Richard Frank, a historian in the World War II, says that Japan was ready to surrender in the summer of 1945. And with the decoded Japanese diplomatic messages, America knew that Japan was going to surrender, but still continued its needless bombing. In determining this act as moral or not, one uses the double effect. In its standard form, the principle can be stated as follows.
When an action that is not wrong in itself has both good and bad results, when the good itself is not the result of bad consequences, when the person so acting does not intend the bad result, but while foreseeing it, lets it happen, even when he or she could prevent it, his or her action still can be morally permissible.
Given that the Japanese were in no way a threat to the United States because of the said facts, then the killing of the innocent individuals in Hiroshima is in no way not unintended. Hence, this act of terrorism is not justified.
For terrorism to be justified according to Igor Primoratz, first the actor must be under a moral disaster, and that terrorism is the only way of preventing a disaster. He says that terrorism is only justified when a people is in extremis. Michael Walzer, in his book Just and Unjust Wars, says that a community is in extremis when attacks on innocent civilians is the only way of surviving an imminent threat to freedom.
Now we look at the situation of the Israel and Palestinian conflicts. Before I get into my argument, allow me to share some history between the two warring states. After the Arab-Israeli War of 1947 to 1948, Israeli Jews began to migrate to Palestine, arguing that it was a promise from their God to a safer haven. But the Palestinians argue that they have been living there decades, nay, even centuries, before any race decided to migrate there. The Palestinians then were conquered by the Jews, driven from their homes or made to live in Palestine as subdued people. At the end of the 1967 war, Israel increased its borders and widened its areas of control. Many of the Palestinians ended up in refugee camps, deprived of the land of what was originally theirs. Palestinians also realized that they were at a great disadvantage in terms of the Oslo Accords, or the series of agreements between Israel and Palestine. They had realized that the accords were greatly in favor of the stronger party, which in this case was Israel, or the Jews. Many people who opposed the Israel government, or Israel in general, were killed or tortured or brutalized in prison. At the command of Ariel Sharon, countless refugees residing in the Sabra and Shatila camps were massacred. Then the Palestinians resorted to terrorism. They sacrificed themselves and they committed suicide with a bomb attached to their chest while being inside Israeli territory. While these acts are without a doubt terroristic in nature, can they be justified? We determine our answer by looking back at our history, particularly with our war against the Nazis. Such violence is accepted because it was intended to stop the regime of a dictator, and it was unintentional for innocent civilians to get killed or those caught between wars. In the case of Israel and the Palestinians, the Arabs had the weaker army. They have also tried to negotiate with Israel, but to no avail. And still, the Israelis continue to broaden their country's expansion. To those who say that the Palestinian attacks kill innocent people and thus are evil, first note that by doing nothing, greater harm or more evil shall come to their way if they do not do anything. Second, whether they kill or not, the lesser evil should be considered. By lesser evil, I mean choosing to force the opposition's political hand instead of letting your fellow people be killed aimlessly by the other government. Harming innocent people cannot be taken lightly, especially when one decides to do it. But when you are given the opportunity to do something else from preventing a greater evil, should you not do it?